Hello, Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity, and in today's Beating a Dead Horse edition, we're going to talk about not going back on what we should have done, but we have a chance now to make a difference for the upcoming or middle of the winter season and all respiratory viruses. And yet we still seem to just talk about drugs and intervention without looking at some really potentially powerful tools to modify it. We're going to talk about three right here and talk about three studies, and these are all related to COVID. The first one is in, let me leave the zinc one to the end because that was the most extraordinary. We'll start with the D one. Vitamin D as a benefit to respiratory infections. This isn't new. We've known this forever. And so this was a study on people in the ICU. So these are people who are not doing well with ARDS, so acute respiratory distress syndrome. These are people who are not doing well. And it was standard protocol for them to start D3 in the hospital, which is good, but it's a little too, the barn door is already open. And we should have started it beforehand. It's not a miracle, but it certainly makes a difference for a lot of people, especially if they're low. However, out of the small study, out of 26 people, only 4 had been taking vitamin D when they went to the hospital. So these are 26 people. Now, ultimately, not everybody converts well. I didn't talk about how much was given or how much people were taking beforehand. But the people who had low 125 dihydroxyvitamin D, which is the active form, did worse. They were on ventilators longer. They had more problems, worse scores. So vitamin D played a role in the outcomes with this. Again, not the first time we've seen a study of vitamin D playing a role in respiratory viral outcomes. The other one was on the Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet I've been a big fan of for a long time. It's a very palatable diet for a lot of people. And this was done in Spain. They looked at a little over 5,000 people, average age 52.6, so a little bit younger than me, but right around my cohort. And they found that those people, out of them, 122% were diagnosed with COVID. And the people who had a middle, so you've got low, middle, or really high adherence score to Mediterranean diet. They looked at like 126 questions or foods that they were questioned on. And those with a medium score were 50% less likely to be diagnosed with COVID. Those with a high Mediterranean score were 64% less likely to be even diagnosed. Forget outcomes, just diagnosed. Like this is like, I don't even know what to say. It just, to not talk about this just continues to frustrate me 3 years later. But the last one is the really startling study, and this was on zinc. And so the people with hypozincanemia, and so basically these were people that were checked at the screening center. So they presented with a screen to get screened to see if they had COVID. There were 152 people with COVID-19, and they compared them to people who were not diagnosed with COVID. Those who had, first of all, so the people who had COVID, so low zinc was relatively common, but the ones who had COVID were 28% of them were low in zinc. The people who didn't have COVID, it was 11%. So almost like triple difference in there. They were more likely to be older patients, over 65, and in nursing homes. But the staggering difference was in the people with low zinc were 10.9 times, so over 1,000% more likely to be hospitalized. What would have changed if we had given just zinc to nursing home and our elderly populations? We'd be having a just totally different discussion at this point if we had this approach years ago. So going forward, we need to educate people on these simple, inexpensive interventions that could have a massive difference in trajectory for the bulk of patients. So as always, I'll post a link to these studies in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.